Welcome to Get Mad. I'm Mad Hildebrandt, and today our guest is Maggie Toulouse Oliver, New Mexico's Secretary of State. She's going to join us and talk about what she has accomplished and what she's looking forward to doing for the state of New Mexico. Welcome, Maggie.
Thanks, Matt. I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I know that that we've spent a lot of time while I was running, around him. I got a really good chance to get to talk with you and to get to know you. And I think it's really exciting to watch you run for re-election. And so what I want to talk about today are some of the things that you particularly can do or are doing in your position as Secretary of State. So I think the first thing I'd like to ask you, because a lot of people maybe don't really know, and a lot of people that are voting this year might not really know what exactly your job entails.
It's a big job. It's one of the bigger statewide positions, in fact, because I have a wide variety of responsibilities in the Secretary of State's office. A lot of my fellow Secretaries of State joke that, it's the office where the legislature puts things when they don't quite know what to do with them. And that's true for this office too, but first and foremost, oversight of elections statewide is one of the most fundamental roles, and I think that's the role that the Secretary of State's office is most known for. So I work together with the 33 county clerks around the state, and my job is to provide interpretation, consistency, and application tools and resources down to the county clerks so that they can manage elections at the county level. That involves a wide variety of responsibilities. We maintain the voter registration database at the state level, for example. We provide materials, we provide voter guides, a variety of things of that nature. I'm also the Chief Ethics Officer, so there are about 7 different ethics-related statutes in New Mexico that my office is charged with enforcing, or if you have documents that you have to file, for example, campaign finance reports or lobbyist reports that are filed with my office, and I maintain the overarching system that hosts all of that documentation. And then we have a different division that was moved to our office in 2014, which is the Business Services Division. Used to be the Corporations Bureau in the Public Regulation Commission. So every business that's created and every filing that has to occur for a business in New Mexico goes through my office as well. And then we have just a variety of custodial and ministerial duties. We oversee the notary public program. If you need to go to a foreign country and you have to have your documents verified in order to do that, we do that verification. It's called an apostille. So a wide variety of duties, all falling under one roof of a fairly small office of about 46 employees.
Okay, so that will give everybody now should have kind of a handle on exactly what it is you're doing. So one of the things that I think that's really important here in New Mexico, because we have actually kind of a large Native American population. I was reading about your initiative, your Native American Voting Task Force, and the idea that this is going to help make things easier for that population in order to vote. So can you talk about that?
Sure. So New Mexico is not unique in the sense that it took quite a long time for Native Americans to truly have the right to vote in our state. In 1948, Isleta Pueblo member named Miguel Trujillo sued the Valencia County clerk to get the right to vote and won. And so since that time, Natives have had the right to vote here, but there have been literally hundreds of years of, historical disenfranchisement, of broken trust between tribal members and governments and state government and federal government, just a lot of obstacles for our tribal people to overcome. And what they're kind of contending with today is, although we're doing a much better job at providing services to our tribal folks in terms of early voting sites on tribal lands and translation and interpretation services, we do announcements over the radio in all of the state's 13 native languages, but there are still issues, still challenges. We still have the broken trust. We still have, in some tribal areas, a lack of voting culture because even within their tribal governments, their leaders are chosen by elders and not by the tribal membership as a whole. We have huge rural areas to contend with. Sometimes it's very hard for a tribal member to get to a nearby polling location. Sometimes they don't get mail service to their home, so getting an absentee ballot is difficult. So we have a lot of the digital divide is still a tremendous challenge in rural tribal New Mexico. So we have a lot of challenges that we're trying to contend with. And so I formed the Native American Voting Task Force. It's made up of members of Pueblo, Navajo, and all three Apache nations here in New Mexico. They come together on a monthly basis with my office. We meet in tribal areas all over the state. We bring in the public from that community, county clerks, their staff, to talk about the challenges and talk about potential solutions and how my office can help to try to overcome those. We know it's a long game. That's the other thing. This isn't like, okay, we formed this last October, and so now here a year later, we're going to have a magic bullet address the fact that tribal participation is less than participation around the state. It's going to take a long time, and I've committed to all of these folks that as long as I'm in office, we will continue to make this a priority and to try to tackle this issue and do it in a culturally sensitive and language appropriate way, which I also think is really important because often there are these top-down approaches to try to spur participation and turnout in our elections. And I just don't think those work. They really need to be driven by the people from within those tribes and those cultures. And that's what we're doing. And so far, we're off to a really great start.
Well, that sounds really exciting. And I know, talking with some of my friends, that there's been a disconnect when some of my friends heard the tribal members will come in and they'll vote, and a lot of the voting is on the same day, and often in the same building, but in different locations. And so they'll go in and vote in their election, but then not come over and vote into ours. And so there is a disconnect. And I think it's just in the discussion and the dialogue that needs to be opened up. And it seems like this task force is trying to reach into that and figure out, how that can be fixed. That's exactly
right. That's exactly right. Addressing that disconnect, or I always say bridging that gap, right? And I think it's important because if our tribal people are not being represented at the polls in at least equal numbers to the rest of the voters of the state, their values and their concerns and their issues are not going to be as well heard or as well represented by our elected leaders. And to me, that's a disservice to our tribal people. So that's why we're trying to bridge that gap. And you're right, it all starts with the conversation. That's exactly right.
Right, exactly. And then just to see that the more that people become more active in this system, then the more we're going to see people being active, like, seeing people running for office even, and just being active. And it's so exciting to watch, like, say, Deb Haaland, and just seeing that move across the nation, not just in our own state. So that's really an exciting thing to watch.
Yeah, I totally agree. It really is.
So let me ask you about another population that tends to be forgotten or, sidelined. And that is, and another one that's really important, again, in our state, particularly in our state, and that is our military and veteran populations. And what can you do in the Secretary of State's office to facilitate, just various things for that population?
I completely agree with you. Unfortunately in this country, we recruit folks into the military, we train them, we give them good jobs, and then sometimes we send them out into conflict. And, often when those folks come home, I don't think we're necessarily keeping our end of the bargain as a country, right? And making sure that there's adequate health care, making sure that there's adequate services for our veteran population. So I agree with you. I feel very strongly that making sure our veterans are cared for should be one of our top priorities as a country. My office, most of it, as we kind of talked about, is somewhat ministerial. But what I will tell you is, just like we were talking about with our Native population, It's really, really important for our military veterans and our active military voices to be heard. We have had a program in New Mexico for about 10 years now where we are able to actually email ballots to active military and overseas voters. And this is particularly important in areas, for example, we will have residents of our state actively deployed in combat in foreign countries, and we're not even allowed to know where they are, right? Because what they're doing, is it's important to keep their location secure. So how does a person get a ballot and get a chance to weigh in and vote? And of all the folks that should be weighing in and voting, right, this is probably the most crucial population because they're actually out risking their lives for our country as we speak. So I've been very protective of that program. We've gotten some flack for it from some organizations around the country that are concerned about the security of our elections and, can votes be hacked? And, of course, we take precautions. We send these ballots through a secure email process. But it is really important for us to continue to have that service because, again, we really, really want to encourage that overseas and active military voter participation. And just to say it, for me, just the act of voting in general, every citizen should take advantage of that because our military veterans are the ones that have gone out and put their lives on the line to protect our democracy, to protect our continued right to vote, right? And so every time I go to the ballot box, I'm always going in mind that there have been men and women who have literally risked their lives and made the ultimate sacrifice to protect my right to vote. And I always think about honoring them when I cast a ballot. And that's one thing that I love to talk about and make sure that everybody thinks about. It's like, even if you are kind of turned off by politics and, don't like the candidates or whatever your reasons are, at a minimum, we should do it for all the men and women who've given their lives for this country. And I think that's really important.
Right. Absolutely. And that's a good approach to that. And I do like that idea of making sure that you are able to reach right out onto the battlefield. I know that as a professor at the college that I teach at, I teach online and I teach at a college I've been teaching at for almost 20 years, and it's in New Jersey because we were military. And my students, I've had students that would actually go out on patrol and then come back and then take their test or do whatever their assignments are. And so we adapt, and to not adapt is an unfair sort of thing. So I really appreciate, and it's very similar, and I appreciate what you're talking about there.
Yeah.
So,
we'll keep doing it. We'll keep doing it as long as we can.
Absolutely. And that's really great. That's so, another thing I want to talk to you about, and again, because this was again, one of the really important things for me, and what one of the drivers behind my campaign while I was running was the idea of transparency in government. And that, because I just so, when you see these things like just what was happening just this past week with Cavanaugh, and then you would hear Donald Trump say, oh, well, we're going to question everybody. But then you hear from Lindsey Graham that there's this very limited pool of people who are going to be questioned. And then you hear from Trump's, and so we don't know what's happening in government.
Right.
We don't know. So Can you talk about, I know transparency in government is one of those topics that you're also really, you really find important. Can you talk to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And first and foremost, I mean, you bring up the Cavanaugh situation. I think for me, like so many women across the country, this confirmation process has become almost personal because it brings up issues that, frankly, almost every woman I know has experienced at some point in their lives, right? And I think it is important for us as American citizens to know the truth. Whatever that may be, right? If Mr. Cavanaugh is completely innocent, or if he is guilty of having done these things, and he's going to be sitting on the highest court in this nation, we deserve as American citizens to know that. And there are checks and balances in that process for a reason. And that's why it's really important that the Senate is putting a pause and taking the time to do an investigation. And we deserve a complete investigation into that, whatever the outcome. And with that said, I've brought the attitude that we as citizens deserve to know as much as possible about our government to the work of my office. And that's why one of the very first things that I did in office was to make candidates and public officials financial disclosure statements available online. It's hard because those of us that serve in elected office here in the state, we're also people, right? And especially our legislators, they don't make a salary, so they have to earn a living in some other way. But it's really important for us as voters to know what the financial interests of our elected officials are, because it tells us something. It tells us something about what interests they're committed to and how, how they may vote, down the line on certain policy issues. If you're a teacher serving in the legislature, or if you're a rancher, or if you're a lawyer, and issues come up during the course of a legislative session that may impact those particular groups, if you know what financial interest a particular individual has in any of those particular professions, it might give you some insight into why they are choosing to vote the way they are. These are really important things that we deserve to know as voters, because it helps us educate ourselves about our elected officials, and it helps us make decisions at the ballot box. Another really crucial piece of that, for example, is who is paying to help elect our elected officials, whether it be a lobbyist or whether it be an outside interest group. And one of the things that I'm working on, we finally got some funding from the legislature this last year. Starting next year, we're going to start building a brand new, robust, I'm hoping state-of-the-art model for the nation in terms of a campaign finance system, so that when we look up an individual candidate or public official serving in elected office, we can automatically see what are the interest areas that are helping to fund this candidate. If there's an independent expenditure coming from out of state to help get them elected, who is that? Where did their money come from? What special interest did their money come from? Again, this is all really crucial to our ability as citizens to engage in our own self-governance and to make informed choices at the ballot box. That's why I feel so strongly about the issue, and that's why I've been taking the steps of putting the disclosures online, writing the campaign finance rule to require independent expenditures to disclose their donors and their expenditures, etc. Because again, this transparency is absolutely crucial for our ability to engage in our own democracy.
Oh, absolutely. That's absolutely so true, because right now, we're busily running to I'll just say it, Ballotpedia or one of the other ones, and trying to figure all that stuff out.
Right.
Who's behind each of these groups. And I know that, when I was running, people kept saying, oh, well, she's got these PACs or something, but there were no PACs. But having something like that shows so that when you hear something and you don't have to go look and say, well, where is this a Pinocchio? You have one place to find out if that's a Pinocchio, is there or is there not a PAC? And and what is that PAC, and where are they from? And so I think that's really, really an exciting tool that is going to be put into our election basket here in New Mexico.
Yes, yeah, I agree, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I am too, because I know trying to look something up, let me tell you, I've tried to look up some of the information from, even now, it's all online, but it's hard. It's like a learning curve to try to figure out how to look things up. And then, there's such a disconnect between what's federal and then what's state. There's a disconnect there. So if we can be the leaders here, then maybe that will go up to the national, and they might do something too.
It's entirely possible, and I think that we have the potential to be the leaders in so much here in this state. I think that we We often think of ourselves, and kind of lament the fact that we're last in this and we're second to last in that or whatever. But we have the potential to lead the nation in terms of good government and transparency and secure and fair elections. We are already leading on many of those fronts, but we have the potential to really, again, create a model for the rest of the nation in terms of our financial disclosure. So that is 100% a commitment of mine moving forward. And one of the main reasons why I'm running for re-election, because I want to be able to continue this work.
And that sounds like you're doing for me, those things are things that also speak to me. And so I want to ask you to address, speaking of things that speak to people, a lot of my followers happen to be progressives and or libertarians. And so I want to ask you about some of the topics that are important to these people that they've asked me to start asking people. So I'm going to give you just a bulk list of things that people are interested in knowing what you can do, or maybe, what some of your ideas are, or personal ideas maybe. So some of these more progressive issues are marijuana, immigrant population, gun control and crime, and Medicare for all. So thinking along those lines, what do you think, either that I don't know that the SOS could even do that. So the Secretary of State. So, where do you stand on some of these issues?
That's a good question. And people don't actually ask me often what my positions are on the issues, again, because as you point out, my role is such an administrative role. I don't make law, I don't sign bills, but I do implement law. And, again, so just speaking really briefly to some of my personal preferences, I'm very pro marijuana legalization. I don't personally use marijuana, nor am I interested in that, but I do see that as having tremendous economic potential for the state if it's done right, if it's regulated appropriately. And, I think that we're losing out to states like Colorado in terms of the economic potential for the state. I definitely would like to see some much better progress on the healthcare front. I am personally in favor of a Medicare for all bill. But again, my office is about running fair elections. And at the end of the day, I truly believe that if the majority of people want to change, if they want to legalize marijuana, if they want Medicare for all, if they want more gun control or less gun control, if they want, whatever issue that you are coming into the ballot box with that you are truly passionate about, for me, what my job is in that regard is to make sure that you have complete unfettered access to the ballot box, that it is easy for you to get registered to vote. And that's why I support things like automatic voter registration and same-day voter registration, because we have the technology to do that here now and prevent people from taking advantage of the system. I'm doing everything I can to increase access to the ballot box. And so again, while I'm working with the Native American tribes to improve their access, I pushed for the vote center legislation that has made it easy for voters in most places in the state to cast a ballot in any polling location. We might want to look at potentially vote by mail in every election in the state, maybe again the way they do in Colorado, where a voter gets a ballot in the mail and then they get to choose, they can go to a polling place if they want or put it back in the mail, whatever they want to do, whatever we can do to ease whatever burdens are in place to casting a ballot, because that's where the voters of the state get to have their say. So my position on these issues, while I think are, is important for people to know just so they know who I am and where I'm coming from, what they should know is that my commitment at the end of the day in the position of Secretary of State is to protect the right to vote, make sure our elections are secure, make sure every ballot is counted as cast, and to make sure voters can express those opinions at the ballot box, because that is the absolute most fundamental way we can make change on any issue that we care about.
Absolutely. I think that is absolutely one of the most important things, is just access and making sure everything is counted correctly. And I want to ask, and this is something that I hadn't really been thinking about before, I just thought about it now. And when you're talking about access, my own mom is in a wheelchair, and a lot of my family is disabled. And I know that is also, and there is an issue that we have for disability access. And I know that because of my own mom, I do pay a lot of attention when I'm out everywhere. But one of the things that I've noticed is that even though there might be access, if you can get in the location in your wheelchair, it's also not comfortable for them. Right. Because a lot of people, for my mom, I mean, people are ignored. We've been trained through generations. Don't look. We all know that. Don't look, honey. But really, that carries on. So is there anything that maybe there's some way that we could maybe talk about centers for voting centers that maybe make it a little easier for disabled people to feel more comfortable there, or that are maybe disability centric?
Well, yes. And let me say this, there's a lot that we are doing, and there's a lot that we can do better. So let me speak first about what we are doing. First and foremost, every single physical polling location in New Mexico under both federal, state, and state law is required to be ADA compliant. My office and county clerk's offices work together with the Governor's Commission on Disability, or Disability Rights New Mexico, to assess the ADA compliance of locations. If they're not fully ADA compliant, we can make, at least at a minimum, we can make some temporary changes to the facility with ramps and signage, and making sure there's accessible parking and clear paths of travel. But you're right, sometimes when you get to a physical building, what was considered ADA compliant maybe back in the 80s or even the 90s when it was built, isn't exactly fully accessible. So that is one of the challenges that we need to work on, to continue to try to identify polling locations that are fully accessible, and to make permanent fixes to these locations to make them really accessible. Often a county clerk will have a situation where they're able to identify a really good location, like a community center or a school. And it's really great, except that, the community center or the school doesn't want to provide their big spacious area that they do other activities in for voting. And they'll put the voting in a small little room, right, where people are kind of packed in like sardines. And so that's one of the issues that we need to work on with our facilities. It's like, yes, we're sharing them, but, maybe for voting for just, a handful of days every year, we can figure out a different way to accommodate the other activities of the location while voting is going on. All of our locations have an ADA compliant, accessible voting system, so that if you're in a wheelchair, if you're blind or visually impaired, if you're deaf, if you need any sort of other, for example, we have people who don't have use of their arms, right? And so we have sip and puff devices attached. So we have those at every polling location, but not a lot of people know about them. So this year we've spent a lot of time training both county clerks and providing educational materials for poll workers about how exactly that equipment works. And we've also provided training for all of the county clerks on how their poll officials can help accommodate both blind voters and visually impaired voters, as well as deaf voters, better. So we're constantly doing, continuing education with the folks who are in charge of making sure our elections run smoothly at the county level. We should continue to do that. This is an ongoing project. It's not going to be something that we just, one day, okay, it's solved, we're good, we have everything together. So, I agree. Again, there's things that we're doing pretty well, but there's always room for improvement. And for my part, personally, I'm always working with the disability community, and I know most of our county clerks are, to try to get feedback about how we can continue to do things better.
Okay, great. Thank you for that answer. So we're just right at the end of the interview now, so I want to ask you at this point to just speak directly to your constituents about anything that we haven't talked about that you personally want to make sure to say, and also provide your contact information where they can go, your website URL, and your donation so that they can donate. So.
Sure. Well, Mad, thanks again for this opportunity to talk with you today, and I'm really grateful that you're doing these important interviews. It's just so important for voters to know who's running for election, what they stand for, to educate all of ourselves the best way possible. And I firmly believe that. It's been an absolute honor to serve as New Mexico Secretary of State these last almost 2 years. You know, I grew up here in New Mexico. I grew up in Albuquerque. I attended UNM for my bachelor's and my master's degree. I went to public schools. I'm raising my children here. I am deeply, deeply committed to this state and to the future of the state, and that's why I'm in public service to begin with. And even more than that, I'm deeply, deeply committed to making sure that our democracy is the best that it can possibly be. And I believe that the only way that's possible is by making sure we have secure elections where every voter has the opportunity to easily get registered and cast a ballot, and that they have all the information that they need to make an informed decision. Because then again, I believe the more people participating and the more educated decisions we're making at the polls, the better our government is going to represent us and our values as a people and as a state. So that is my constant commitment in this work. I've gotten a lot of projects started, and I'm really excited about the direction the Secretary of State's office is headed, but 2 years is not enough time, and that's why I'm running for a full 4-year term. And I would very much appreciate everyone's support and vote this November 6th, and hopefully before, if you can get out to early vote starting on October 9th, or to absentee vote. The way that folks can find out more about me and my campaign is by visiting my website, which is my name, MaggieToulouseOliver.com. Toulouse is spelled Toulouse. But if you Google something even close to it, it will take you there. I'm also on Facebook and Twitter. And if folks want to just send an email or something like that and not hassle with the website, they can email at friendsofmaggie@google.com.
Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you so much,